Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 4th of December. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, Emmanuel Macron and Xi Jinping meet in Beijing as the two leaders talk economic ties, Ukraine and trade.
Meta poaches one of Apple's top designers as Mark Zuckerberg doubles down on his AI hardware push.
Plus, spritzing stateside, Campari pours resources into the US as sales slow and competition rises in Europe.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
France's President Emmanuel Macron and Chinese leader Xi Jinping have met in Beijing at a time when relations between the EU and China have been under strain. The two leaders discussed issues including economic ties, trade, Taiwan and the war in Ukraine. Xi described their talks as frank, fruitful and friendly.
Today,
the world is undergoing profound changes, unseen in a century at an accelerated pace. And humanity once again stands at a crossroads. China and France should demonstrate their sense of responsibility, uphold the banner of multilateralism, see through the fog of uncertainty, and firmly stand on the right side of history.
On the issue of Ukraine, Xi went on to say that China hopes a fair, binding agreement acceptable to all parties can be reached. Those comments came as Macron renewed his call for Xi to back Europe's stance on Ukraine and warned against the disaggregation of the world order.
Meanwhile, the UK government is poised to approve China's plan for a controversial super embassy on the edge of the City of London. Key British ministers have signalled their satisfaction with Beijing's efforts to resolve security concerns over what's expected to be the largest diplomatic compound in Europe. Bloomberg understands top officials from MI5 and MI6 are in favour of the project going ahead. Former chief of MI6, Richard Moore, told Bloomberg's Michelle Hussein last month that there ought to be a way through for the embassy.
Countries obviously have to have embassies, so there's clearly, we need one in Beijing, and it's important that we have that for all those reasons I said to you about having channels open and being able to communicate. So it's right and proper that the Chinese should get their embassy. Whether it's this one or not, it isn't really not for me to judge.
Former chief of MI6, Richard Moore there, as the embassy impasse has emerged as the biggest stumbling block to improving ties between the UK and China. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has scheduled a visit to Beijing and Shanghai at the end of January, days after the new deadline for the embassy's approval. He'd be the first British Prime Minister to visit China in 8 years.
A top institutional investor has said that even if frontrunner Kevin Hassett is appointed as the next chair of the Federal Reserve, he may not be able to deliver the rapid pace of easing that President Trump would like. Gregory Peters, co-chief investment officer at PGIM Fixed Income, told Bloomberg that Hassett wouldn't have the power to deliver cuts on his own.
But on one hand, you have the Fed independence question, with Hassett as basically tied to the administration. But on the other, does he have the credibility within the committee to drive consensus? I don't think he has that credibility. I think that's what the bond market's telling you. But it's important to remember that it's a full committee, and you have to have the confidence of the committee to drive consensus. And I don't know if he has it.
Peter's comments come as bond traders and fund managers game out the impact of Trump's shake-up of the Fed, where hints of policy changes can send ripples through markets. If Hassett is appointed as chair of the central bank, allies of President Trump are said to be also considering making Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent the top White House economic advisor.
Artificial intelligence will make its debut on one of the world's largest capital markets. But critics say that the enthusiasm surrounding the technology could be dangerous. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has more.
The London Stock Exchange Group has agreed a deal to give ChatGPT access to its licensed financial news and data. According to a statement, the agreement with OpenAI will make LSEG content available to the chatbot's users from December 8th. It's the latest in a series of technology partnerships signed by the data provider, including an agreement with Microsoft to develop AI models. But some are sceptical of the sector's deal-making rush. The CEO of research firm Anthropic says a number of companies are being too risky with their AI spending, committing billions of dollars despite growing uncertainty. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
The Financial Times is reporting that the European Union is planning a fresh antitrust probe against Meta over the use of artificial intelligence features in WhatsApp. The FT says an announcement of the investigation is possible in the coming days, and the Commission is preparing to open the probe into the way the US company is integrating its Meta AI system into the popular messaging service.
Meanwhile, Apple's top designer has been poached by rival Meta in a major coup. Bloomberg understands the Facebook parent is hiring Alan Dye, who has been head of Apple's user interface design team since 2015. Our senior tech editor, Nick Turner, says the move reflects Meta's plan to focus on product design.
The big moonshot at Meta is creating an augmented reality glasses, spectacles that would really sort of become a mainstream product. And presumably he's going to be helping work on that. Mostly the design for those products comes from Ray-Ban at the moment. And so I guess we're just still maybe kind of a wait and see mode in terms of figuring out how he's going to influence the way they design some of those products.
Bloomberg's Nick Turner speaking there. Dye's departure extends a recent talent exodus for the iPhone maker, which began with the exit of visionary executive Johnny Ive in 2019. Apple confirmed in a statement provided to Bloomberg News that Dye will be replaced with longtime designer Stephen LeMay.
And those are your top stories on the markets this morning. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index up 0.6%, being boosted mainly by Japanese shares. The Nikkei is up 2.2% in Tokyo. Eurostoxx 50 futures are also 0.6% higher this morning. The 10-year Treasury yield up 2 basis points at 4.08%.
Now, in a moment, we'll bring you the latest on President Macron's trip to China, what it means for the EU's relationship with Beijing, and why the CEO of Campari is on a mission in America. But before we get to that, there's always another story that catches our eye. And today it's the opinion columnist Lionel Laurent who's asking if quality of life can be a European superpower, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're all used to this narrative of the decline in Europe's and economic and regulatory heft. It's been getting louder since Donald Trump returned to the White House. Remember Jamie Dimon telling European leaders earlier this year, you're losing. Lionel is suggesting that perhaps that traditional regulatory superpower moniker is being replaced by one of a lifestyle superpower. Now, he points to the data on this. Income inequality, social mobility and life expectancy in the EU are all screening better than in the US, even if GDP doesn't. And there's little in the Europe that he writes that compares with the opioid crisis. Cities are safer. Infant mortality is lower. European living standards have a far smaller gap than Americans than GDP suggests, according to one piece of research that he picked out from the think tank Europa as well. But it's the problem of making higher living standards enough, I suppose, to be considered a superpower, and also maintaining them in a difficult economic environment.
Yeah, look, I get it. Like bashing the European lifestyle, we know is happening, but it is also part of an agenda, isn't it? A sort of soft power agenda that is being waged. So I do wonder whether Europe needs to kind of wake up to that messaging and advocate and kind of protect for its own sort of philosophy on life, is how I'd put it. That has been developed over centuries. You know, you think of the Enlightenment, social democracy, language, history, culture, food, all those things. I mean, I think a lot of Europeans, like that about Europe, but I do think that it is part of this kind of, the change in the world, maybe the different visions of what it is to have a good life.
Well, indeed, and perhaps we all need to speak up for it in the prospect of there being pressure being put on it, particularly from an economic point of view. Very interesting piece, well worth reading. Bloomberg.com/opinion. We'll put a link to Lionel's article in our podcast show notes as well.
Now, let's bring you the latest on Emmanuel Macron's trip to China and his meeting with President Xi Jinping, where they've discussed Ukraine and economic ties and really difficult, tense issues. Our chief Asia correspondent, Roslyn Matheson, joins me for more now. Ros, we've heard from both the leaders subtly quite different messaging. What was said about Ukraine? Was there any shift in China's position?
Well, not really, at least so far when it comes to China. As expected, Macron again urged China to support the European position on Ukraine, which is really the Ukraine position on Ukraine, and to possibly lean more heavily on Russia using its economic leverage to do so. But you got the usual kind of comments in response, really, from the Chinese President Xi Jinping. He said that China hopes that there can be a fair and binding agreement acceptable to all parties. That's fairly much the standard line from China, and that Beijing will play a constructive role in whatever comes. And again, that's pretty much the standard China line, because what we've seen so far through this conflict between Russia and Ukraine is that China hasn't really been that keen to use its economic leverage, which is the key point of pressure on Russia to get it to do anything when it comes to Ukraine. I mean, China doesn't seem particularly enamored of the fact this war is going on and probably wants it finished as well. But equally, it doesn't want to disrupt its economic and strategic relationship with Russia too much. So there's no sign that it's been doing that. So far, really, it's kind of the standard positions that we've seen so far. Macron urging China to bear in mind the Ukrainian point of view, and China just saying that they hope there can be a decent ceasefire for all.
On the economic front then, Ros, there was talk of pragmatic cooperation, balanced development of trade ties. But how difficult a line is Emmanuel Macron walking here? He wants more investment from China, as do many European countries. But the relationship between EU and China is quite strained over issues, ranging from dumping of products to rare earth controls.
Well, that's right. So it's a very tricky relationship and a tricky trip for Macron a bit. As a result, as you're saying, he wants more investment from China into France. He called for that today. We also know he wants to ward China off from putting tariffs on French dairy and pork. And they did sign some cooperation agreements today, covering areas like natural resources, also cooperation on sort of aviation and biopharma. But at the same time, Macron's been a key one calling out sort of global trade imbalances. And he was one of the taking more of the harder view on China, urging those tariffs that we saw come on China EVs last year, for example. And so balancing all of that out is quite difficult, because Macron, like others, recognises the need to have a diversification of your trade relationships, particularly with what's been happening with the US. So you do need to engage China, but equally, he's been quite concerned about imbalances in the relationship and just sort of the idea of unfettered investment potentially from China. So it's a very, very difficult line that he's having to walk here during this trip.
Yeah, indeed. Ros, thank you so much for being with us. Macron, not the only European leader, of course, going to China. Thanks for being with us, our Chief Asia correspondent, Roslyn Matheson. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, the new CEO of drinks maker Campari has big ambitions for Aperol Spritz. Simon Hunt wants to make it the drink as much of a mainstay in Texas as it is in Milan or Berlin. It's a key part of his plan to turn around the drinks maker, whose shares have dropped about 40% in the last 2 years. Our reporter Antonio Vanuzzo joins us from Milan for more. Antonio, good morning. First of all, tell us about the challenges that Campari has been facing.
So good morning, or actually I should say buongiorno in Italian. Yes, Simon Hunt has been appointed in January and is kind of pursuing a strategy to focus on, he calls them fewer, bigger bets, in the sense that the company has more than 70 brands. Some of them are profitable, others not so much. And so he's focusing on what he calls the champions. And among those, of course, the first one is Aperol, which is, the orange drink. They claim that it brings the sun into a glass. The orange color is contagious. And Aperol sales, actually the weight of Aperol sales for Campari Group rose massively over the last few years. Now it accounts for about 25%, but obviously there are quite a lot of headwinds in the sense that, in general, drinks industry is facing lower consumption, and there are structural headwinds like inflation, for example. And one element that I would like also to mention is the weather. So if obviously you have a rainy summer, you are not so keen to go out and have an aperitivo, and this obviously has an impact on the sales of the beverage companies in general.
Yeah, and Simon Hunt, who became the CEO in January, has also been speaking to Bloomberg's Italian language podcast. And Antonio, this is where I wish I had learnt some Italian. You're going to have to tell me the Italian name, the title of the podcast, so that our listeners, who perhaps are Italian speakers, will be able to download it.
Yeah, so it's quello che I soldi non dicono, which literally means what money is not telling us.
Okay.
So the US, obviously, it's a big opportunity for the company because Aperol is not so popular yet in the country. The US is typically a beer drinking country, and what they're doing is that they're pursuing a strategy where they focus on 11 cities, which are the largest, especially in the states of California, New York, Texas, and Florida, which are key strategic states for them. And the idea is to kind of erode the market share of beer sales. Then obviously that's not easy because of the structural headwinds that we mentioned before. So it's basically putting loads of marketing effort and advertising effort to raise kind of awareness over this brand, which is not so popular.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.